You're listening to the RetireCoast podcast, where money, business, and lifestyle come together. Join us each week as we explore smarter financial planning, starting and growing businesses, and building the life you want at every stage, from millennials and Gen X to today's retirees.
Thank you for returning to RetireCoast. Our topic today is one of my favorites. It's about starting a business. More specifically, it's about millennials or even Gen Z starting their first business or possibly buying a business from a retiring baby boomer. Now, there are many of you who are considering this. As a matter of fact, somewhere near 50% of all millennials are at least thinking about the opportunity of starting their own business. Maybe you work in a job that you just think is going nowhere, or you get tired of looking at the wall, you can't see outside. You are cooped up in a building all day, for example, maybe sitting in the same chair doing coding or something that is making money for you. You know, you're doing what you went to college to learn, but it just isn't satisfying enough for you. And you were thinking that possibly going out and starting your own business, doing something you like to do, might be a better move. And actually, that's not a bad idea as long as you do it right, because it's far better to be in a job or in a business that you enjoy and look forward to coming to every day than something that is just drudgery and you think those years are just going to go by, and where you're going to end up with maybe you have a few dollars put aside, but you haven't been happy. So if you're thinking about starting a business, we'd like you to come to RetireCoast.com. We have an entire membership section, and I'm not trying to sell you something right now because this podcast is absolutely free, along with many of our articles are free. And the key article that actually drove me to do this podcast, the one I created about millennials starting a business, is also free. We also have a number of free tools. But let me get back to the membership. The reason for that is it's costly to create all of the things that I'm doing to share my knowledge of starting many businesses. They were all successful. I sold every single one of them and did well financially with them. And I enjoyed the entire process, every single one of them. And the reason I sold one is because I saw something else I wanted to try, and I moved on, much like millennials do now with job hopping. And I found what I really wanted, and I stayed at my last company that I started for a little over 20 years before I sold it to a Fortune 500 company. So I've been there and I've done that, and I want to help you do the same. So the membership is to help offset the cost involved in creating the materials, the tools, everything that you'll be getting in that. You'll be hearing in this conversation that's going to take place here shortly, a dialogue between two individuals that are going to be discussing this article in some depth. It's actually a long article. It's about 7,000 or 8,000 words at RetireCoast.com, and this podcast is going to run you about 40 minutes or so, and I think you're going to get a lot out of this. Normally, I would do this myself. I would go through the entire podcast, but I found that a lot of times the dialogue actually helps a lot with me just thinking as I'm trying to decide what I'm going to say next. It's a little more difficult, so the dialogue process I like because it's going to help you a lot better. You're going to learn a lot about things that you probably didn't know, and this maybe will trigger your final decision about whether you want to go into a business or not. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of work involved here. If you think about a business, you probably have something in mind. We are giving you some good examples in this of a landscaping business. It's a low-tech, highly profitable business that's not difficult to get into, doesn't require a lot of cash, and it's just one of many that are like that. So, you don't have to be thinking like you're going to start another Amazon or something else where you need millions of dollars. That's really not the case, and we're going to go through all of that. The main thing is that you have the drive. You want to learn. You want to become an expert at that thing, and you're going to just get up every morning by yourself and get out there and do it. You don't have to have somebody get you out of bed. Self-motivated, and you don't need lots of employees. Employees are somewhat problematic. You have all the issues with them, bringing them on board. They're not going to probably work as hard as you have. That's been my experience anyway. But you need some, and your business may grow to the point where you need 2 or 3 of them, but it's different today than it was back when I first started my business, where we needed a lot more employees because we didn't have AI and we didn't have all the tools that you've got today. So we're going to go through all of that in this dialogue that follows here. And if you are suitably impressed, then go to RetireCoast membership section and read and see what we have there for you. You can always quit if you don't like it, but there's a tremendous number of tools in there, including one that helps you create a business plan. And there's a lot of them are decision-making tools. They're not just spreadsheets. They step you through the process so that you actually can come to a realization that, okay, I want to do this or I don't, or I want to do this business or I don't want to do this one. And it'll help you through the process because, businesses fail at a very high rate. And there are definite ways to keep your business from failing. And we're going to discuss that in this article here. And the use of a lot of our tools for decision making are going to help that process also. So don't be afraid. If it's something you really want to do, there's going to be a way to do it, provided that there's a market for whatever you're offering, a service or a product. And again, that is also going to be discussed in this article. So as soon as I quit here, you'll be hearing the dialogue, and then I'll pick up at the end. Thank you.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We're looking at a demographic shift in the business landscape right now that is, it's quietly restructuring how wealth is generated in this decade.
Yeah, it really is.
And the mission today for you, our listener, is to map out a highly specific, risk-reducing blueprint for starting or acquiring a business today. And we're analyzing this entirely through the lens of the Millennial and Gen Z mindset.
Right, which is a cohort that is fundamentally changing the definition of what a successful enterprise actually looks like.
Exactly. Now, the stack of notes for our analysis today comes from a comprehensive framework. It's titled Starting a Business as a Millennial by Bill Anderson. He's a seasoned operator who has built, scaled, and ultimately sold multi-million-dollar businesses.
And his work is heavily featured over at RetireCoast.com, which I know, it sounds a bit counterintuitive.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious question is why a platform focused on retirement is publishing deep dives on millennial entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
But as we dig into the mechanics of building a sustainable, sellable asset, we'll see that the architecture of a resilient business is entirely age agnostic.
For sure.
To frame this entire discussion, I was looking at the demographic split in the 2024 to 2026 data.
Yeah.
And there's this massive anomaly I want to dig into right away. We're currently seeing a 25% surge in millennial business ownership.
Wow.
I know. They are undeniably the fastest growing demographic of entrepreneurs in the market right now.
And that 25% surge doesn't happen in a vacuum. It becomes much more significant when you look at the surrounding context.
Right.
For comparison, Generation X, who historically and currently hold the largest total share of small business ownership, they're sitting at around 49%. They are showing a relatively flat, steady growth rate of about 6%. But the real tectonic shift is happening with the baby boomers. We are tracking an 18% decline in their ownership share over the exact same period.
18%. That's huge.
It is. This is the macroeconomic event that a lot of people refer to as the silver tsunami. You have roughly 10,000 boomers reaching retirement age every single day in the U.S. alone.
Right.
And many of these individuals own highly profitable, entrenched local businesses. We're talking HVAC companies, commercial landscaping, specialized manufacturing.
But the kids didn't want them.
Exactly. Their children, the millennials, largely went off to universities to become software engineers or consultants or digital marketers. They really didn't want to take over the family pest control business.
Yeah, it wasn't glamorous.
Right. So now you have this massive vacuum. Millions of stable, cash-flowing businesses are hitting the market without a clear succession plan. And that is creating a buyer's market for the exact same generation that initially walked away from them.
So to you, our listener, whether you are prepping to launch a side hustle, or you're dreaming of leaving a corporate job, or you're just insanely curious about where the market trends are going, we're going to break down the exact mechanics of how this is happening.
And we are entirely bypassing the superficial hustle culture rhetoric.
Oh, absolutely. No toxic positivity, no motivational speeches about grinding 18 hours a day. We are focusing purely on the structural, pragmatic realities of predictable success. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the economic narrative versus the actual data.
Let's do it.
Because the broader media landscape consistently portrays this incredibly harsh economic environment. Inflation, interest rates, capital constraints.
Right, the doom and gloom.
Yeah. Yet Anderson's data indicates that 48% of Gen Z and millennials rate today's business conditions as good. And an impressive 74% of all small business owners are actively expanding for growth in 2025 and 2026.
Which sounds completely backwards if you just read the headlines.
Exactly. So I'm curious how we reconcile that extreme optimism with the broader economic friction that we're seeing everywhere else.
Well, you reconcile it by looking at the execution gap. The data reveals that almost half, 49% of millennials, and a nearly identical share of Gen Z, they state they would launch a business tomorrow if they felt they had the right resources.
So the ambition is there.
The ambition is demonstrably there. The gap isn't ambition, it's access and clarity. And really, it's about the mitigation of catastrophic risk. When you dig into why these younger cohorts are rating the conditions as good, it's because their definition of the game has fundamentally changed.
No doubt.
Well, there is this incredibly tired narrative that millennials and Gen Z are just averse to hard work.
Right, the whole avocado toast generation thing.
Exactly, and that's just a complete misreading of the data. What they are actually doing is rejecting the historic premise of what a business is supposed to do for its owner. For previous generations, success was a binary metric. It was top-line revenue and market share. If you were working 80 hours a week, but the business was grossing $5 million a year, you were successful.
Even if you never saw your family.
Precisely. This new wave of operators, they view success as an alignment problem. They are optimizing for control over their time, geographic flexibility, sustainable unit economics that don't require them to have a heart attack by age 40.
So it's lifestyle design.
Exactly. They are looking at business as a vehicle to design a specific lifestyle, not as a master that they just have to serve indefinitely.
I think that shift, that move from optimizing for pure revenue to optimizing for return on time is the defining characteristic of this new class of founders. And it shows up immediately when we categorize the types of businesses they're actually starting.
It's a very specific intersection.
Yeah, it's this blend of digital native capabilities and deeply ingrained personal values. E-commerce naturally takes the top spot. They're utilizing drop shipping models, right? Or third-party logistics to just completely eliminate warehouse overhead.
Right, effectively scaling revenue without scaling a physical footprint.
Exactly. Then you have digital services and tech startups, where an overwhelming 74% of these younger operators are baking AI into their core processes from day one.
And they aren't just using AI to write polite emails?
No, they're using it for programmatic ad buying, automated customer service routing, predictive inventory management. It's wild. But I don't want to paint this as a purely digital phenomenon either. The third largest sector is health, wellness, and fitness. Gyms, therapy apps, alongside a massive surge in sustainable and eco-friendly ventures.
And that sustainability sector is a perfect example of that values alignment we just discussed. They are building businesses around the circular economy, retrofitting properties for renewable energy, creating supply chains with transparent carbon footprints.
Right.
But I do want to introduce a point of friction here, because the media severely skews our perception of what millennial entrepreneurship actually looks like.
Okay, what do you mean?
When we hear millennial founder, the immediate cultural association is a high-valuation, venture-backed unicorn. We think of Mark Zuckerberg at Meta, or Brian Chesky at Airbnb, the Collison brothers at Stripe.
Right, raising $50 million pre-revenue.
Exactly. Anderson's framework explicitly pushes back against this. Those billion-dollar unicorns, statistically speaking, represent a rounding error. The framework argues there is a much more stable, mathematically probable path to generational wealth in boring, highly profitable, local, Main Street businesses.
The cafes, auto repair, landscaping.
Exactly.
But wait, isn't there a massive disconnect there? You just mentioned that millennials went to college to avoid running the family pest control business. But now Anderson is saying that's exactly where the wealth is. Why would a tech-savvy 30-year-old pivot back to local services?
Because the unit economics of a local service business transform completely when you apply a modern tech stack to it. That is the arbitrage opportunity.
Okay, break that down.
We have to fundamentally redefine what a small business looks like today compared to, say, 20 years ago. Historically, if you ran a local landscaping or plumbing business doing $2 million in revenue, You needed a physical office. You needed a dispatcher.
Someone answering the phones.
Right. An accounts receivable clerk chasing down late invoices, a sales rep driving around doing on-site estimates, an administrative assistant. That is 4 salaries eating directly into your net margin before you even service a single client.
Yeah, that's heavy overhead.
Today, a technically proficient millennial operator can step into that exact same business and replace those 4 salaries with off-the-shelf software.
Wow.
They implement a system that automatically texts the client a booking link. They use Google Earth to do remote, instant estimates for property services so nobody has to drive out there.
That's brilliant.
They use automated invoicing that vaults the client's credit card and just charges it the moment the GPS tracks the crew leaving the geofenced property.
So no one is chasing checks in the mail.
None of it. The overhead plummets, the margins skyrocket, and that tech-savvy owner suddenly realizes that a boring local business is actually an incredibly lean cash-generating machine.
That is a phenomenal transition of leverage.
Yeah.
You're taking software margins and you're applying them to physical world services. It sounds incredibly lucrative when the model works, but let's stress test this optimism.
Let's do it.
Because Anderson doesn't let the reader off the hook. He pivots hard into the reality of failure. If the tools are this good and the margins can be this high, why are the failure rates still so punishing?
Right.
The framework insists that business failure is almost never a mystery.
Yeah.
It isn't a lack of passion. It isn't a lack of motivation. It is an autopsy of highly predictable structural collapse.
It's math.
It is. If we look at the postmortem of failed businesses in this data, they consistently die from one of 4 diseases, what Anderson calls the fatal 4.
Let's hear them.
Number 1, cash flow problems, which is implicated in a staggering 82% of failures. Number 2, no market need, taking down roughly 35 to 42%. Number 3, competition or being outpriced, sitting at 19 to 23%. And number 4, poor team or management at 23%.
Okay, let's tear into that 82% figure for cash flow. Because I think running out of money is very often misunderstood as simply not making enough sales.
Which is completely different, right?
That is the most dangerous misconception in business. Lack of sales is a revenue problem. Cash flow is a timing problem, and it is far, far more lethal.
Okay, explain the difference for someone who might not see the distinction.
You can have a business that is wildly profitable on an accrual accounting basis, a business that is doubling its sales every single quarter, and it can still go bankrupt next Tuesday.
Wow.
The mechanic we have to look at here is the cash conversion cycle. Let's say you take over one of these commercial landscaping operations. You land a massive $50,000 contract with a corporate business park. You are thrilled.
Pop the champagne.
Right. But to service that contract, you have to buy $10,000 in materials today. You have to pay your crew every Friday for the next 4 weeks. You have to pay the insurance. You have to pay the fuel costs. You are bleeding cash every single week.
Okay.
Then the job finishes and you send the invoice. But it's a corporate client and they operate on net 60 payment terms. They aren't paying you for 2 full months.
Oh, wow.
So you have a massive profit sitting on your spreadsheet. You look successful on paper, but your actual bank account is completely drained. If another client delays a payment or a piece of equipment breaks and needs a $10,000 repair,
you can't make payroll.
You cannot make payroll. The business collapses not because the idea was bad or the sales weren't there, but because the growth outpaced the working capital.
So, ironically, landing too many big contracts too quickly can actually be the exact mechanism that kills the company if the invoice terms are mismatched with the operational expenses.
Exactly. Growth is a cash-hungry monster. Think of cash flow like oxygen for a scuba diver. It doesn't matter how beautiful the reef is, the reef being your business idea. If you run out of air halfway through the dive, you're done. Profit on paper is completely useless if the cash isn't there to pay the bills.
That's a great analogy. And for a younger founder, especially one transitioning from a salaried corporate job where money just magically appears in their account every 2 weeks, the concept of managing a 60-day invoice gap is probably entirely foreign.
It is, and it's usually compounded by the cardinal sin of early-stage entrepreneurship, which is commingling personal and business finances.
Oh, yeah. Putting the software subscription on the personal visa.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you pay for software on your personal card or you pay yourself by just transferring whatever is left in the business checking account at the end of the month, you completely mask the true burn rate of the business. You have absolutely no idea what your actual operating margins are until the tax bill hits or a recession tightens up the credit markets and you suddenly realize you've been technically insolvent for 6 months.
That brings up an interesting vulnerability, which leads directly into the second of the fatal four, no market need, which accounts for up to 42% of failures.
Right.
If a founder does manage their cash tightly, but they are building something no one actually wants, the runway just extends the eventual death of the company. The framework is brutal on this point. I want to look at the exact phrasing Anderson uses because it cuts right through the typical Silicon Valley echo chamber. He writes, "Interest and compliments are not the same as willingness to pay."
That is profound.
I see this all the time with early stage founders. They survey their friends, they get 100 likes on a LinkedIn post announcing their new idea, and they interpret that completely friction-free social engagement as market validation.
It's the confirmation bias trap. When you ask a friend, hey, would you use an app that does X? The social cost of saying yes is 0.
Right.
People are polite, they want to support you. But business is not built on polite hypothetical scenarios. The market, which is an aggregate of entirely self-interested consumers, is the ultimate arbiter of value.
If it doesn't solve a pain point, they won't pay.
Exactly. When you build a solution for a problem that people only find mildly annoying rather than urgently painful, you are building a nice-to-have. And in any sort of economic tightening, nice-to-haves are the very first line items cut from a consumer's budget. The only true validation of market need is a transaction. Until someone who has no personal relationship with you hands over a credit card to solve a problem, you do not have a business. You have a very expensive, time-consuming hobby.
But how do you test that without spending $50,000 to build the product first? If validation requires a transaction, but the product doesn't exist yet, aren't you caught in a catch-22?
Not if you understand the mechanics of what we call smoke testing in the startup world, and this applies just as well to Main Street businesses.
Okay, walk me through a smoke test.
You don't build the product, you build the offer. You put up a highly targeted, simple landing page detailing exactly what the service is, the exact price, and the exact benefit. You run $200 of hyper-local Google search ads to that specific page. You put a buy now or book consultation button on the site. When the user clicks that button, they don't get charged. They get a pop-up saying, "We are currently at capacity and not taking new clients. Enter your email for the waitlist." You haven't taken their money. You haven't built the infrastructure. But you have successfully validated that a stranger was willing to initiate a commercial transaction at a specific price point. You just gathered invaluable, definitive market data for $200 instead of $200,000.
That's a phenomenal tactic. If they don't click, it's just feedback, not a failure. It completely de-risks the initial capital outlay.
Exactly.
Let's move to the third failure point, competition and being outpriced. This sits at around 19 to 23%. If you validate the market and you have the cash flow dialed in, how do you prevent a larger incumbent from simply undercutting your pricing and bleeding you out?
You avoid it by fundamentally refusing to compete on price.
Which sounds easier said than done.
It takes discipline. But if a business isn't clearly differentiated in its positioning, it becomes a commodity. And when you are selling a commodity, you are entirely interchangeable with every other provider in your zip code.
Right.
At that point, the only lever you have left to pull to win a customer is lowering your price. That is a race to the bottom, and the prize for winning that race is bankruptcy. The framework states very clearly, you don't need to be cheaper, you need to be clearer.
Clearer.
Yes. You have to communicate your specific value proposition so narrowly that your target audience realizes you are the only logical option for them. If you are a commercial cleaner, you don't say, "We clean offices." You say, "We specialize in HIPAA-compliant sanitation for high-traffic dental practices."
Oh, that's incredibly specific.
Exactly. A dental practice manager won't care if you charge 20% more than the generic cleaner down the street because you have specialized away their perceived risk. Yeah. You are competing on clarity and trust, not on a race-to-the-bottom hourly rate.
Which perfectly transitions to the fourth fatal flaw, poor team or management. And I want to spend real time here because I think this is where highly intelligent, highly motivated millennials actually self-sabotage the most.
Oh, without a doubt.
The data points to a 23% failure rate here. But honestly, I would argue it's the root cause of the other three. The framework notes that for this specific demographic, who deeply prize independence and autonomy, poor management rarely looks like the stereotypical boss yelling at employees. It looks like total isolation. It is the solopreneur trap.
The solopreneur trap is an incredibly dangerous psychological hurdle.
Walk us through it.
When a founder starts a business, they are usually the primary operator. They are the best at sales, they are the best at fulfillment, and they are the best at customer service.
Because it's their baby.
Right. But as the business grows, they hit a physical ceiling of hours in the day. To break through that ceiling, they have to hire. But here is the friction. When you hire your first operator, they're only going to be about 80% as effective as you are. They won't care as much, they won't be as fast, and they will make mistakes.
Naturally.
The perfectionist founder watches this, gets incredibly frustrated, fires the employee, and says, you know what, it's just easier if I do it myself.
I've heard that exact phrase so many times.
That exact moment is when the business stops being a scalable asset and simply becomes a highly stressful, self-created prison. You are no longer a business owner. You are an employee of your own unyielding demands. And isolation just quietly undermines all your progress.
So what is the tactical solution to that?
Yeah.
If you know the employee is going to be worse than you, how do you justify the hire and maintain the quality of the business?
You have to shift your identity. You move from being the operator to being the architect. Your job is no longer to do the work. Your job is to build the machine that does the work. You do this through standard operating procedures, or SOPs. You document every single granular step of the fulfillment process. You create checklists, video tutorials, flowcharts. You build a system that is so robust that a person operating at 70% of your natural capability can achieve a 95% perfect outcome simply by blindly following your system.
So the system carries the weight, not the talent of the employee.
Exactly. The framework reminds us that founders often resist this level of rigid structure because they started a business to find freedom. But the ultimate paradox of scale is that disciplined structure is the only mechanism that actually buys you freedom. If the business requires your physical presence and your real-time decision-making to generate revenue, it is not a business.
That is a staggering realization for so many. Structure creates the freedom.
Yes.
So to you listening, what does this all mean for you? If we know that these 4 failure points, cash flow cycles, lack of market validation, commoditization, and the solopreneur trap are the predictable diseases that kill a business, it means risk can be engineered out of your business before you even launch.
Completely.
And this brings us to Anderson's concept of the living business plan. The directive here is a complete inversion of how most people think about starting a company. Risk reduction has to happen before the launch.
Yeah.
The framework insists that your psychological starting line should not actually be your business idea. It must be the specific outcome you want for your life.
This is exactly where we separate the amateurs from the professionals.
Say more about that.
Amateurs start with a product idea. They build it, they push it into the market, and then they try to mold their life around whatever chaotic demands the business creates. Professionals start with the outcome. They define the exact parameters of the life they want to live, and they engineer a business model specifically designed to generate that outcome.
So they build a box first.
They build the box first. You have to clearly define the shape and size of that box. What is your absolute required monthly draw to cover your personal overhead? What is your desired time commitment? Are you willing to sprint for 60 hours a week for the next 3 years to capture market share? Or do you have young children and a strict hard stop at 40 hours?
Right. What are your boundaries?
Exactly. Are you willing to manage a team of 20 full-time employees, or do you only want to manage 3 high-level independent contractors? Once you define those rigid boundaries, you ruthlessly filter every single business idea through that lens.
I love the pragmatism of that. It totally prevents the scenario where someone who loves, say, hiking on the weekends decides to open a retail wedding photography business, instantly guaranteeing they will never have a Saturday off again for the rest of their career.
Exactly. They built a successful business that completely destroyed their actual life goal.
So once you have the boundaries set, how does this living business plan actually function? Because traditionally, a business plan is a 40-page academic document filled with fictional 5-year financial projections that you hand to a bank and then literally never look at again. It's like a school assignment.
Right. The 40-page MBA-style business plan is largely a relic today, unless you are actively seeking institutional venture capital. For the types of resilient, cash-flowing businesses we are discussing, you need a living business plan. It's not fixed. It is a highly tactical 1 to 2 page document that serves as a real-time shared risk reduction tool.
And who is the audience for this plan? Lenders, mentors.
The primary audience is the founder, first and foremost. It's written for you to keep you tethered to reality when the operational chaos hits. Then, yes, lenders, partners, and mentors. If you were drafting this right now, you need 3 core columns.
Okay, let's write this down.
First column, the simple outline of the offer, the specific, highly painful problem you were solving, and exactly who you were solving it for. Second column, the unit economics, early addressing of cash flow, exactly what it costs you in time, materials, and software to deliver 1 unit of that solution, startup costs, break-even point, and what your margin is. Third column, and this is the most important part, the near-term milestones, the single trackable metric that proves validation.
Let's drill into that third column. What is an example of a good near-term milestone versus a bad one? Let's use real examples.
A bad milestone is projected year 3 revenue of $1.5 million. It is imaginary. It is entirely detached from present reality.
Right.
A good actionable milestone is acquire the first paying customer who is not a friend or family member within the next 14 days.
That's tangible.
Extremely. Once you hit that, the plan updates. It's living. The next milestone is acquire the first repeat customer or achieve a customer acquisition cost of under $50 on Google Ads. The next is hire 1 part-time virtual assistant to handle all inbound scheduling by week 8.
So progress is measured in these aggressive micro checkpoints. Momentum is built through small wins.
Yes. You have to internalize that true operational clarity comes after action, not before it. You take a calculated step, you review the actual data from the market, you adjust the living plan, and you execute the next step.
To make this entirely concrete, I want to pivot to the case studies Anderson provides in the source material. We're going to introduce a surprisingly perfect business model for this generation that doesn't involve venture capital or complex tech. When we talk about millennial businesses, we are conditioned to think of complex SaaS platforms or direct-to-consumer lifestyle brands. But the framework points us toward a profoundly different model. We are doing a deep dive into the asymmetric power of the boring business.
The boring business.
Yes. And the primary case study used in the text is the local landscaping industry. Why does a framework focused on sophisticated business architecture use mowing lawns as its apex example?
Because landscaping, when operated correctly, represents the holy grail of financial fundamentals. It is recurring, predictable, cash flow, positive revenue.
It's okay.
The macro data supports this heavily. The demand is intrinsically stable and historically recession resistant. Grass continues to grow regardless of Federal Reserve interest rate hikes.
Very true.
And the client base is driven by unchangeable factors. You have increasing homeownership, strict homeowner association regulations that mandate lawn care, and a rapidly aging boomer population that physically can no longer maintain their own properties. It is a geographically constrained, recurring necessity.
And from an operational standpoint?
The barrier to entry is highly manageable. You aren't investing $2 million in proprietary software development before you see a dime of revenue. You need reliable equipment, transportation, and a fanatic dedication to operational efficiency. It has natural scalability.
But if the barrier to entry is low, doesn't that mean the competition is astronomical? How does a new entrant avoid the race to the bottom we talked about earlier?
This is exactly where the millennial tech advantage comes into play. If your primary competitor is a 55-year-old operator who runs his business out of a spiral notebook on the dashboard of his truck,
who requires clients to mail physical checks.
Right. And who takes 3 days to return a voicemail, you don't have to compete with him on price. You compete on absolute customer frictionlessness.
Frictionlessness.
Yes. You deploy a modern tech stack to completely outmaneuver the incumbent on customer experience and internal margins. Let's look closely at case study 1 from the text. James.
Okay, let's look at James.
James was a machine operator working a full-time swing shift at a manufacturing plant. He wanted to start a business, but he had zero margin for error. He didn't have $50,000 in savings to burn.
Right.
Instead of adopting the toxic burn the boats and leap mentality, James systematically engineered the risk out of his launch.
James's story is the perfect antithesis to hustle culture. Let's look at his specific actions that neutralize those fatal 4 failure reasons. First, he categorically refused to quit his W-2 job. He protected his personal cash flow by starting part-time. He ran the business purely on the margins of his schedule.
Which is brilliant.
Second, he avoided unnecessary debt. He bootstrapped using the mower and the basic tools he already had in his garage. And third, he utilized that smoke testing validation we discussed. Neighbors became his first customers. He validated that people on his street would pay his asking price before he ever expanded his radius.
And he deployed a highly specific living business plan. The brilliance of James's plan was how he defined his exit from his day job. He didn't pick a random date on the calendar. His exit was mathematically triggered.
Tell us about the trigger.
He set a rule. I will only resign from my day job when the net profit from the landscaping business consistently exceeds my manufacturing salary for 3 consecutive months, and I have 6 months of operating expenses and cash reserves.
Wow. He built a financial fortress before he ever considered taking a leap.
He did. But he also had to address the inherent structural flaw of his industry, which is extreme seasonality. In most geographies, winter effectively zeroes out a traditional landscaping company's revenue. If you aren't prepared for that, that cash flow gap will bankrupt you by February.
So how did he pivot? The notes say he expanded his services, but he didn't just pivot to shoveling driveways. He moved upmarket into commercial needs for the winter months. He developed skills in laying concrete, building specialized flower beds, and securing high-margin pressure washing contracts.
Right.
He realized that corporate property managers have budgets they need to spend before the end of the year. So he positioned his winter services to capture that specific B2B cash flow, effectively subsidizing his business during the off-season.
Let's run James's execution through the Fatal 4 diagnostic to see exactly why he survived. Cash flow. Bulletproof. He had a W-2 income, 0 debt, and created year-round commercial revenue streams. Market need. Instantly validated by securing paid contracts in his immediate neighborhood before scaling.
What about competition?
He didn't race to the bottom. He priced himself firmly in the middle of the market, competing on the reliability of his communication and the ease of his digital invoicing. And management. He documented his exact process for quoting, mowing, and billing. When he finally hit his revenue trigger and quit his job, he immediately hired a part-time operator.
Not to replace himself entirely, right?
Right, but to test his SOPs and his ability to manage personnel. He proved that low entry cost does not mean low professionalism. By treating a one-man push mower operation with the exact same administrative rigor as a $5 million corporation from day one, he achieved rapid stability.
James is a masterclass in bootstrapping. But, and I know a segment of our audience is listening to this right now and thinking, I understand the mechanics and I want the cash flow, but I genuinely have no desire to grind out those first 50 customers. I don't want to start from scratch.
Which is completely fair.
Right. And this is where Anderson's framework introduces the alternative path, which circles us right back to the macro trend we opened with, the acquisition strategy.
This is about stepping directly into predictability.
Exactly. Building from scratch is inherently chaotic. Buying an established entity allows you to bypass the most dangerous phase of a company's life cycle, which is the search for product market fit.
When you acquire a successful business from a retiring boomer, you are buying immediate, verifiable cash flow on day one. You are inheriting a seasoned, loyal customer base.
A proven history.
A proven history. You are buying a documented historical record of financials that you can aggressively audit, which allows you to make decisions based on actual data rather than speculative projections.
Let's dissect case study 2 from the text. Mark took this exact route. He located a business called Green Thumb Landscapers. The owner was a retiring boomer who had run this highly profitable business for 20 years, but was physically ready to retire. The owner didn't have a child to pass it down to, and he didn't want to just dissolve the business and leave his long-term clients stranded.
So Mark steps in.
But the critical lesson here isn't just that Mark bought it. It's how the transaction was structured. It was flexible. Mark didn't walk into a major bank, hand over a 20% down payment, and take out a traditional loan. He utilized something called seller financing.
Yes.
Let's break down the micromechanics of this, because I think a lot of people assume you need massive liquid capital to buy a business.
Seller financing is arguably the most powerful leverage tool in small business acquisition, and it is uniquely suited for this current demographic transition we are seeing.
Explain how it works.
In a standard bank loan, the bank pays the seller a lump sum and you owe the bank. In seller financing, the transaction is structured directly with the owner. The retiring owner effectively acts as the bank. You, the buyer, negotiate a reasonable down payment, and for the remaining balance, you sign a promissory note directly to the seller. You agree to pay them back over a set period with an agreed-upon interest rate.
And where do those payments come from?
You make those monthly payments directly from the free cash flow that the business itself generates.
But let me play devil's advocate here. If I'm a 65-year-old owner, why on earth would I take the risk of financing a younger kid I barely know? Why wouldn't I just demand all my cash up front from a bank loan so I can be done with it?
Well, there are a few highly compelling reasons. First, it bridges the valuation gap. Often, a seller wants a slightly higher price than a traditional bank's underwriter is willing to lend against. Seller financing allows the seller to get their asking price, provided they're willing to wait for it.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the ultimate beauty of this structure for the buyer is the alignment of risk. If Mark takes over and the business collapses in year 2, the seller doesn't get the rest of their money. Therefore, the seller is highly financially incentivized to ensure Mark succeeds.
That creates an instant mandatory mentorship dynamic. And we see this perfectly in the case study. The seller of Green Thumb didn't just hand Mark the keys and disappear. He stayed on part-time. He physically drove Mark to the largest commercial clients, introduced him, and personally transitioned the relationships.
Right, transferring that trust.
Exactly. And Mark was incredibly disciplined post-acquisition. The expert analysis of why Mark succeeded points out that he didn't rush changes. He stepped into a working machine, he learned its rhythms, and only gradually introduced digital payments and simple tools to improve efficiency without breaking what worked.
That is a crucial point. When you buy a functioning machine, your first job is simply to observe the gears turning. Mark respected the history of the asset he bought.
But there is one massive hidden detail in Mark's story that is the absolute secret sauce to ultimate wealth in small business and has everything to do with the specific name of the company he acquired. Which brings us to our final section, the exit strategy.
Yes, beginning with the end in mind.
The framework outlines a golden rule from Bill Anderson. A business is infinitely more valuable if it can be sold. You have to name your business with the exit in mind. The name of the business dictates its transferability.
Let's look at the psychology of the buyer and the consumer here.
Okay, let's compare 2 hypothetical businesses doing the exact same revenue. One is called Jimmy Peterson Landscaping. The other is Gulf Coast Premier Landscaping. If we look back at our case studies, James deliberately named his company Gulf Coast Exceptional Landscaping, and Mark bought Green Thumb Landscapers.
Right. If you are an investor looking to acquire a business and you look at Jimmy Peterson Landscaping, you see massive key man risk. The entire brand equity is inextricably linked to a specific human being.
Precisely. If Jimmy Peterson sells his business and retires, what happens the next week when a new crew shows up? The clients walk out and ask, "Where's Jimmy?" Perceived value drops immediately.
Exactly. Because of that specific customer churn risk, an educated buyer will apply a heavy discount to the valuation. But if the business is named Green Thumb Landscapers, the client has a relationship with an entity, not an individual. When ownership changes hands at Green Thumb, the client largely doesn't care, provided the grass gets cut to the same standard.
The brand protects the cash flow from the founder's departure.
Exactly. And the naming convention is just the start. The text discusses the hallmarks of an exit-friendly business. Customers on legally binding contracts, clean, auditable financials, significantly reduced owner involvement, repeatable systems.
When you connect this back to you, the listener, even if you are starting a tiny side hustle today, building it so it doesn't rely on your specific personality gives you absolute freedom. You can keep it, you can hire a manager, or you can sell it outright. You are building options. You aren't just starting something. You're building something that gives you choices.
It aligns perfectly with that millennial desired lifestyle rather than consuming it.
Exactly. Okay, to summarize this journey, we've seen that Millennial and Gen Z entrepreneurship is booming. We know the silver tsunami is real. We know failure is highly predictable and therefore avoidable through cash flow management and actual market validation. And whether you build a local service from scratch like James or buy an existing one like Mark, structure is your ultimate safety net.
100%.
To close this out, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought, a challenge derived directly from the Source's readiness quiz. Think about the business idea you've been kicking around, or the side hustle you're running right now. Now imagine you were forced to hand over the keys and sell it to a total stranger in exactly 5 years. What is the very first thing you need to change about your idea today so that it survives without you tomorrow? Keep asking the hard questions, validate those ideas, and keep diving deep. We'll see you next time.
I hope that you enjoyed listening to this podcast and that hopefully you've learned something from it. And maybe you're one step closer to deciding whether you want to start a business, or maybe you've decided you don't want to start a business as a result. Both are good results, I think. If you go to RetireCoast.com, you'll check out many of our articles on how to start a business and all of the different aspects about the business, plus our tools. We have an entire tool section for millennials. Then we have a tool section for others too, and millennials can obviously use those. But we're building out our business membership. We have many things in there already. We're highly leveraging AI for decision-making process, all, of course, with my input, so that you'll end up having more tools to decide, and not only the decision-making, but the actual process of doing it. It takes some things to create a business. For example, you have to come up with a name, and you need to create the legal structure for that business. We can teach you all of those things in the membership. Once you sign up, it's all free for you at that point. Obviously, you're going to pay the membership fee, but beyond that, there's no additional charge for any of these tools, and some of them are very expensive. If you go to the internet just to buy something, for example, let's say that you buy a building that you want to use for your business, and you want to put that into the business name. So we have the documents to be able to do that also. Many of those things in there that you have to go pay another professional for, we allow you to do it on your own and then just use the other professional for advice and review. So thank you again for coming to this podcast. Please come to our other podcasts. We also have a YouTube channel as well. But the main product really is RetireCoast.com. Well, thank you, and hopefully you come back again.